You know, for decades, we've all been told that the brain is basically a computer. A biological one, sure, but a computer nonetheless. But what if that entire metaphor has been, well, just wrong? We're about to dive into a radical new theory that might just change how you see everything: consciousness, emotions, even your own thoughts.
Okay, I know. Jello? Really? But just hang with me for a second. Let go of all the ideas about circuits and processing and code. Instead, just picture your brain as this single, continuous, physical, kinda gelatin-like thing. It sounds wild, I get it, but this one little shift in perspective is the key that unlocks a whole new way of understanding the mind.
All right, so let's get a little more serious than Jello for a minute. We're not just trading one simple metaphor for another here. What we're really doing is throwing out a purely computational model and replacing it with one that's actually grounded in the real-world laws of physics.
So on one side, you have that classic computer model, separate circuits, digital bits, ones and zeros. But on the other side, this is the new physical field model. It says, no, the brain is a continuous, dynamic field. And get this, in this model, your thoughts aren't abstract computations. They are actual physical waves moving through the brain's tissue, which has this amazing property called viscoelasticity, meaning it's kind of like a liquid and kind of like a solid all at once. Exactly like a ripple spreading through that bowl of Jello.
And here's where it gets really wild. These thought waves don't just travel on one level. They're moving across three interconnected physical layers simultaneously. So you've got your electrochemical flows, that's the movement of ions that we're all familiar with from neuroscience. Then you have the electromagnetic fields that those flows naturally create. And finally, and this is the big one, you have actual mechanical waves, like little pressure waves, physically moving through the brain tissue itself. The whole thing is one complete physical system.
So, okay, if our entire mental world is made of these physical waves, then how in the world does that become what we actually feel and think? Well, this leads us to the core idea of the whole theory, and it's this incredibly simple but powerful analogy taken straight from physics.
In this model, it's pretty straightforward. Emotion is physical stress building up in the brain's tissue. That feeling of tension you get, that's it. It's real. And thought? Thought is the physical strain. It's the way the brain tissue literally moves and reshapes itself to relieve that stress and find balance again. I mean, just let that sink in for a moment. Every single time you have a thought, your brain is literally, physically changing its shape to make it happen.
But, of course, there's a catch. That jelly-like tissue, it's got physical limits, right? It can't just handle an infinite amount of stress and strain all at once. It needs some way to manage the load.
And that brings up a really important question. What happens when the brain is just overloaded with all this emotional energy? It can't just crash like a computer. So evolution did something incredibly clever. It developed a few specialized buffer systems.
And here they are. Think of these like specialized holding tanks for different kinds of mental pressure. First up, you've got the amygdala. It's the buffer for raw emotional strain, basically a reservoir for excess emotional energy. Then there's the hippocampus, which handles what we call thematic strain. It takes all the little bits and pieces of sensory info and weaves them together into stories. And finally, you have the cerebellum, which manages the whole system, acting like a master conductor to predict, stabilize, and synchronize the entire orchestra.
Okay, so we've got this physical system of stress, strain, and these buffers. That's the mechanics. But what does any of this feel like from the inside, for you and me? Well, this is where it gets absolutely incredible, because this physical setup gives rise to the two most fundamental peaks of our entire conscious experience.
The first one is called the center of image. See, as those emotional waves of stress move through your brain, they don't just spread out evenly. They actually converge and create a single point where the intensity is at its absolute maximum. That's the bright spot you see in a dream, or the very core of a powerful feeling. It's the where, the spot where an experience feels the strongest.
And the second peak is the center of meaning. Now, this one is a peak in time, not in space. As the thought waves, the strain, are organizing, they all converge into a single moment of perfect coherence. This is that aha moment, that sudden flash of insight when an idea just snaps into place and becomes crystal clear.
So, at the end of the day, our inner world is defined by these two experiences. You've got the center of image, which is all about space and emotion, where it feels most intense. And you've got the center of meaning, which is all about time and theme, when an idea becomes perfectly sharp.
So we have these two peaks, image and meaning. And that's a really neat theory, but so what? How does this actually explain our day-to-day lives? Why do you feel super focused one minute and then completely anxious the next? Well, let's connect the physics directly to the psychology.
This is such a cool part of the theory. It suggests that the literal physical stiffness of your brain tissue, that viscoelasticity, is changing all the time. When it's in a low viscosity state, more fluid and loose, those mental waves can travel around freely. That's what it feels like to be dreaming or in a creative flow. When it's balanced, you get stable, focused thought. But when it gets too stiff and rigid, a high viscosity state, the waves get trapped, and that is the physical reason we feel stuck. It's anxiety, it's exhaustion, it's when you can't stop thinking about something over and over.
All right, let's wrap up with one last idea from this theory that I think is just incredibly relatable. Have you ever had that feeling where there's a huge disconnect between how you feel about what you can do and what you can actually do? Well, this model has a really interesting explanation for that.
So the theory suggests our sense of self is a kind of balancing act. On one hand, you've got your emotional amplitude. That's how capable and confident you feel. And on the other, you have your thematic reality. That's your actual skills, what you've really done. When that feeling is way bigger than the reality, well, that can lead to overconfidence. But when the reality is way bigger than the feeling, that's a perfect description of imposter syndrome, isn't it?
And this quote from the source material just nails the implication here. Nobody else can see or feel your internal emotional waves, that private sense of confidence or insecurity. All they can see is the output, your actions, your words, your behavior. And this theory gives a physical reason for that deep and sometimes painful gap between who we feel we are on the inside and how we come across to everyone else.
So, if your brain isn't a computer running a program, but a physical medium, then your mind isn't code, it's a symphony, a constant flowing symphony of stress and strain, of emotional crescendos and quiet moments of meaning, all conducted by the physical nature of the brain itself. Which just leaves one question, really. What kind of music is your mind playing right now?